We often hear that a person's greatness begins in their mind. History is full of examples, people like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and Jeff Bezos who turned their thoughts into extraordinary achievements. They weren't born with guarantees of success. What set them apart was how they thought about themselves, their ideas, and what was possible. Napoleon Hill famously said, "What you think about, you become." It sounds inspiring, almost magical. But if that's true, why do so many people still struggle? Why do countless people wake up every day wanting a better life yet never quite breaking free from survival mode? Do they not dream about their future, or do they simply fail to recognize their own potential? Today's story gently answers these questions and leaves us with a powerful lesson worth remembering. At a crowded railway station lived a beggar who survived each day by asking travelers for spare change. The station was always noisy, trains screeching, announcements echoing, footsteps overlapping in a constant rush. In this chaos, the beggar had become almost invisible. A familiar figure people passed by without really seeing. Every morning, he took his usual spot near one of the pillars, stretched out his hand, and repeated the same line, "Please help me, I have nothing." Some days he collected enough coins to buy a little food. Other days, hunger was his only companion. In his mind, this was simply his fate. He had silently accepted that he was just a beggar, and life, he believed, had nothing more to offer him. One afternoon, as he watched people hurry by, he noticed a sharply dressed businessman stepping onto the platform. The man's polished shoes, crisp suit, and confident stride instantly caught the beggar's attention. Convinced that such a wealthy-looking man would be generous, the beggar rushed over, stretched out his hand higher than usual, and asked for money with a hopeful tone. But instead of reaching for his wallet, the businessman paused and looked him directly in the eyes. Then he asked a simple yet surprising question. "Do you always take from others? Have you ever given anything to anyone?" The beggar froze. No one had ever asked him that before. People either ignored him, pitied him, or tossed a coin without a word. Confused, he stammered that he had nothing to offer. He was just a beggar. What could he possibly give? The businessman smiled not unkindly, but firmly, and replied, "If you believe you have nothing to give, then you have no right to ask. I believe in exchange. If you can offer something, I can give you something in return." With that, he turned, boarded his train, and disappeared into the crowd, leaving the beggar standing there with an empty hand and a head suddenly full of questions. Those words stayed with the beggar long after the train had left. That evening, as the station grew quieter, he sat alone and replayed the conversation in his mind. "If you believe you have nothing to give," the sentence bothered him. For the first time, he wondered whether people gave him so little because he offered nothing in return. Was he really giving the world nothing? Was he truly that empty? Days passed, and although his routine stayed the same on the outside, something was shifting inside him. Instead of begging mechanically, he started observing. He watched how people reacted when someone offered them something, a newspaper, a snack, a cup of tea. He noticed that when there was an exchange, however small, people smiled more, talked more, and seemed more willing to part with their money. One morning, as he sat near the tracks, he noticed a small patch of wildflowers blooming just beyond the platform, a splash of color in the middle of gray concrete and steel. They were simple flowers, nothing special, but they stood out in that rough, noisy place. An idea sparked in his mind. Maybe he did have something to give. He picked a few flowers gently, arranging them as best as he could. That day, he made a quiet promise to himself. From now on, anyone who gave him money would receive a flower in return. It was a small gesture, but it was something. To his surprise, people loved it. When he held out not just an empty hand but a flower, their expressions softened. Some smiled, some laughed, some paused to look closely at the petals as if they hadn't seen a flower in a long time. "For me?" they would ask. "Yes," he'd reply. "Thank you for helping me. This is for you." And something remarkable happened. They gave more generously. Some people who would have walked past without noticing him stopped to give a coin just to receive a flower. Others came back the next day looking for him. In a place where everyone was in a hurry, he had created a brief, human moment of exchange. Over time, he began to recognize a pattern. When he had flowers to give, people were kinder and gave more. On days when the flowers were scarce or wilted and he had nothing to offer, their generosity shrank. It became clear to him people value exchange. They don't just want to give. They want to feel that what they're offering is recognized, appreciated, and matched with something, however small. One day, as he was handing out flowers, he saw a familiar face in the crowd, the same businessman who had once refused to give him money. Excited, almost nervous, he hurried over. This time, he didn't stretch out an empty hand. Instead, he held out a small bunch of flowers and said, "Sir, today I have something to give you. If you give me money, I will give you flowers." The businessman paused, then smiled, clearly pleased by the change. He took out some cash, handed it to the former beggar, and accepted the flowers. "You've understood the value of exchange," he said. "Today you are no longer a beggar, you are a businessman." Those words lit a spark inside the flower giver. They echoed even louder than the businessman's earlier challenge. "You are no longer a beggar, you are a businessman." In that moment, he suddenly understood what had been true for some time. People weren't giving him money out of pity anymore, they were paying for the flowers. He wasn't begging, he was trading. He had moved, quietly and gradually, from asking to offering, from helplessness to value. That very day, he made a decision. He looked at the station, the pillars, the worn spot where he used to sit, and he knew he could not go back to seeing himself as a beggar. He left the station, determined never to return in that role again. The months that followed were not easy, but they were different. He began collecting more flowers, arranging them more beautifully, learning which ones people liked most. He found a small space to sell them properly, spoke to suppliers, and slowly turned his informal exchanges into a real business. He learned how to greet customers, how to price his flowers, how to reinvest a little money to grow his stock. With every small step, something inside him grew too. His confidence, his vision, his belief in his own worth. The world had not suddenly become kinder or easier. What changed first was how he saw himself. 6 months later, 2 well-dressed men met again at the same station. The platform was as crowded as ever, but this time something was different. One of the men looked at the other with curiosity. "Do I know you?" he asked, trying to place the familiar face. The other man smiled warmly. "Yes, we met twice before right here," he replied. The businessman's eyes widened as recognition dawned. "You're the beggar! The one I refused to give money to, and later bought flowers from." The former beggar laughed, not with embarrassment, but with pride. "Yes, that was me. But now I run a successful flower business, and I'm traveling to expand it." The businessman listened, impressed not just by the success story, but by the depth of understanding in the man who once believed he had nothing. They shook hands not as a giver and a receiver, not as a rich man and a poor man, but as equals. Then they headed off toward their futures, both carrying a renewed sense of what a single idea can do. And that's the heart of this story. Life becomes what we believe about ourselves. The beggar's circumstances did not change overnight, but his thoughts did, and that shift reshaped his destiny. If you see yourself as small, you stay small. If you keep repeating to yourself, "I have nothing, I am nothing," the world will quietly agree with you. But the moment you recognize that you have something, an idea, a skill, a smile, a service, a perspective to offer, you open the door to possibilities that were invisible before. The mind is where limitation begins, and it's also where freedom is born. So ask yourself, in what area of your life are you still standing on the platform with an empty hand, believing you have nothing to give? Is it in your work, your relationships, your dreams, or your talents? What flowers do you already have, however small, that you could start offering to the world? You don't need to wait for perfect conditions, more money, or someone else's permission. The transformation begins the moment you decide to stop seeing yourself as a beggar of opportunities and start seeing yourself as a creator of value. Change your thoughts, and your future will follow. The world may not change instantly, but your actions will. Your posture will. Your conversations will. And slowly, like the man at the railway station, you'll look back one day and realize you were never as powerless as you once believed. Your greatness was always waiting in your mind, asking only for one thing: to be seen, believed, and acted upon.